Hi there, and welcome to our Connected Conservation webinar series. This month we are featuring the Trust for Public Lands. Just a couple of quick housekeeping things before we dive into our presentations today. Throughout the presentation, feel free to ask questions. We do have a question box that should appear on your right-hand side. We'll handle those after the presentation, but you're welcome to plug those in as you have questions throughout the presentation today. Our Connected Conservation Community of Practice hosts a monthly webinar and sometimes twice a month. We'll be plugging in a couple of links into the chat box so that you can check out what's coming up next in our webinar series, as well as what we've presented in the past. We do have just about 50 webinars now that have been recorded and are in our library. All of our webinars are focused on tools that enable parks and programs to work across boundaries and to focus on landscape conservation at scale and at various scales. My name is Cass Hardy, and I'll be our facilitator today. I serve as the team lead for the Community of Practice. And we also have two presenters with us today from the Trust for Public Lands. We have Brittany Rillera. She is a senior legislative representative for the Federal Affairs Group for the Trust for Public Land. She manages a broad portfolio of environmental projects. And then we also have J.T. Horn, who's a senior project manager at the Trust for Public Land. And he's been working there since 2007 and has a wide array of experience as well. So we're grateful to have both of you joining us today. And go ahead, Brittany, you can take it away. And J.T., I'm going to go ahead and give you the right as well right now. And then folks, again, as you're just joining, this is the Connected Conservation webinar for the month of April.
Sure, thank you so much. I am waiting to see the slides pop up. I don't know if you all are able to see them yet, but we're the Trust for Public Land.
Yep, and Brittany, I see it now, so it looks good on our
end.
You
do? Oh,
yep.
Okay. Okay. I can't see that. Well, welcome, everyone. We're really glad that you're here with us. We're really delighted to share what we're doing with the Trust for Public Land and working with our NPS partners. My name is Brittany Riera. I work with the Federal Affairs team, which is based in DC, but I'm in the San Francisco office, and GT has been with us for a very long time. So going on to our next slide, our mission is land for people. So the Trust for Public Land, we create parks and protect land for people. You can see our beautiful picture right there. That's from the Los Angeles area. And ensures healthy, livable communities for generations to come. JT, I'm actually still not seeing that slide. All right.
Cass, are you seeing it on your end?
I am. Yep, I can see it says our mission right now.
Apologies for that. I just not coming up on my side. Oh, wait, there we are. Okay. There we are. Thank you. All right. So spending time in nature, days, hours, or just a few minutes enriches our lives. It makes us feel rejuvenated, healthier, and happier. At the Trust for Public Land, we don't just save land, we save land for people to enjoy. Our mission is to create parks and to protect land for people, ensuring healthy, livable communities for generations to come. The Trust for Public Land is the largest and longest operating organization working to create parks and protect land for people nationwide. So every effort we undertake reflects our organizational beliefs. People need and deserve access to nature. So we work where the needs are greatest and where our efforts can make the biggest difference, from cities to wilderness. We believe that the act of engaging community creates community. We know from experience that both our process and its results are transformational, empowering communities to address inequalities beyond the boundaries of our work. And that's something that the organization takes very, very seriously. So our next slide is our impact slide, and JT, do you want to pick that up?
Sure. So the map you're seeing is all of our completed projects across the country, and also the locations of our various offices across the country. We've been in existence since 1972 and have protected over 3 million acres. You probably have been on a Trust for Public Land protected property, whether you know it or not. And then, Brittany, do you want to talk about this next one?
Definitely. So since 1996, we've guided bipartisan political action on more than 500 ballot measures across more than 30 states nationwide, generating nearly $68 billion in public funds for healthy land and water. But the true measure for our success is the millions of people whose lives are touched by these places every day. From neighborhood parks to national parks, today more than 8 million people live within a 10-minute walk of a place created or protected by the Trust for Public Land, and countless more visit these sites each year.
So I wanted to just go through a little bit of our history with partnering with the National Park Service. And the Trust for Public Land works with a variety of public agencies, you know, the U.S. Forest Service, BLM, Fish and Wildlife Service, states, municipalities. But we've had a long-standing and successful partnership with the National Park Service. Since 1972, we've acquired 204 distinct properties, helped 64 different units of the park system, conserved over 57,000 acres as part of the National Park System. That is inclusive of 29 states. And then a little bit of trivia for you. The park unit with the most TPL projects is the Chattahoochee Natural Recreation Area, and we'll be talking a little bit about that as a case study towards the end of this presentation. Our first project with the National Park Service was at the Golden Gate Recreation Area in 1973, and this slide is actually just slightly in error. I had thought it was the Jean Lafitte National Historical Park, which we did last fall, but I was corrected just this morning that we actually had done another project at the Chattahoochee NRA just in December. So a very active program going back a long period of time. Here it is depicted on a map of all the different places where we've partnered with the National Park System. And the blue dots are projects that are in progress. And we're going to talk about some of those on the Appalachian Trail and the Chattahoochee. And then the black dots are things that we've conserved and added to the United States of America's ownership as part of the National Park System. Just a couple of quick little hits to sort of help you understand the kinds of projects that we work on. This is in Glacier National Park in Montana, completed in 2012. It's the Duty Homestead, and this was an inholding that is on the Middle Fork of the Flathead River. It's inholding associated with Dan Duty, who is the very first ranger at Glacier, and it was his cabin on the river that was acquired and added to the park using Land and Water Conservation Fund monies. We've been working at places like the Everglades, which is the park with the most acreage that we've conserved at over 48,000 acres of remote habitat that we've protected there in Florida. And here's an example of a National Historical Site, which is the Brown versus Board of Education Historical Site in Kansas. This is the Monroe School, which is the school that was integrated as a result of this Brown versus Board of Education Supreme Court decision. And the story here is that in 1993, this building was about to be torn down and demolished, and there was a movement in the community to really recognize the place that this building has in the nation's history. And so before it was demolished, the Trust for Public Land was able to step in and acquire the school building and hold it for a long period of time. And then in 2000 and on the 50th anniversary of the Supreme Court's decision, it was turned into a National Historic Site and open to the public. Cape Cod National Seashore, we've protected a variety of properties there in partnership with the National Park Service, including a campground that allows for visitors to access the park on a low-cost basis. And many people, many families use it as a way to experience that beautiful seashore without having to have the expense of a hotel room or a rental house or something like that. A true kind of land for people type project. And then the final, just quick example is the Stonewall National Monument that President Obama declared in 2016. We worked with the City of New York and the National Park Service to prepare the site for federal designation, including doing some very complicated land transactions so that there could be a plaque erected on what became a very small postage stamp of federal property. So here we're going to shift to talking about how do we partner with a national park unit, or really with any federal agency or state agency. And this is probably one of my favorite pictures of our work, which is along the Long Trail in Vermont, which is not a national park unit, but I love it because it's symbolic of climbing a mountain. And these projects feel like climbing a mountain sometimes. They're very long and very complicated, but there's a partnership-based approach with private landowners and with the agency that it defines our work. So what do? We engage with willing sellers and we negotiate acquisition agreements. One of the things that you probably are all aware of is that the Park Service has a very capable realty team, but the process is very slow, and sometimes landowners have frustrations that are involved with dealing with a federal agency and the pace of work or some of the rules that are involved. And we as a private organization can oftentimes work with a private landowner on a different basis than a federal agency can working independently. A lot of times what we can do is we can take a threatened property and hold it off the open market, gaining time to go through the due diligence process and to assemble conservation funding. The federal acquisition process is very long, typically over 2 years from start to finish, and landowners can get impatient. And so we can step in and secure properties and hold them off the open market either by pre-acquiring them in some circumstances or entering into a contract with the landowner to make sure that they know that the process is moving along. And sometimes it involves quite a bit of financial risk on our part. The other way that we participate is by helping with the due diligence, appraisal, title, survey, those sorts of things. Again, the federal process requires all of those steps to complete an acquisition, but we can oftentimes be more nimble. Things like contracting procedures that a federal agency has to go through, we can just identify a qualified vendor and just hire them sometimes. We oftentimes will absorb these expenses too, which will make the acquisition cheaper for the agency. And particularly with things like appraisal or survey work, that can be tens of thousands of dollars. And then the other thing we can do is build support for the funding. Most of you are probably aware of the Land and Water Conservation Fund. It's the anchor funding source to acquire lands by the Park Service or any of the federal agencies. We're very active in supporting that with members of Congress for individual projects, but also for the program as a whole. And the Trust for Public Land led the national effort to reauthorize that by Congress, which just was completed in the recent Public Lands Bill just a few months ago. We also will work on securing private funds to leverage the federal investment. And what that means is that oftentimes we can bring private grants into the mix through the National Park Foundation, through local community members, through the landowner themselves sometimes. And by working with the agency, we can essentially stretch the federal dollars so that they can go further. And that includes working with landowners. Sometimes landowners are willing to do a bargain sale to achieve a conservation outcome for their property, and they might have complicated tax paperwork associated with that. We can help with that in a way that, again, the National Park Service may have trouble doing independently. And the last two things I want to talk about it jointly, which is to bring more certainty to the process and speed up the time to closing. You know, anyone who's worked in the Park Service for a long period of time knows that partners can really add value at times. One of the reasons we wanted to make this presentation is because if your park is facing a land acquisition challenge, we're very open to working with the agency and working with the landowners that you're trying to acquire property from, and try and, you know, reduce friction, speed up the process, bring more certainty to the process, and we can be very flexible and adaptable to sort of whatever the circumstances are on the ground. So one other way to think about this is that we know that not all of the important conservation properties are within the boundaries of the park unit. And we have a lot of experience working beyond the boundaries and working with local communities to try and buffer park units from incompatible uses. And this slide has a picture of some of our work in the high peaks of Western Maine along the Appalachian Trail. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But this could work at any park unit across the country where you have threatened lands or lands that are important to the park's integrity or the scenery or the historical journey that might not be appropriate for federal acquisition, but some sort of a conservation outcome is desirable. We're happy to work at those park boundaries and with those local communities as well. This example on the Appalachian Trail in Maine involves both the National Park Service ownership, but also the U.S. Forest Service through the Forest Legacy Program, which acquires working forest conservation easements, and the U.S. Navy with their REPI program, which is the base buffer program. And the Appalachian Trail goes right by a Navy survival school where they train SEALs and pilots how to survive in a mock prisoner of war setting. And what do they want? Well, they want to be left alone with no neighbors. What does the Appalachian Trail want? They want to be maintain a wilderness experience and the scenic integrity of this long-distance hiking trail. What does the local community want? They wanted to maintain their working forest economy, their snowmobile trail system, their view sheds and scenery from some of the small towns and villages in that area. And so we put together a very ambitious partnership-based approach that would bring in other sources of conservation dollars besides just Park Service money to acquire and protect lands around the Appalachian Trail. And the result has been over 29,000 acres has been conserved, primarily by the U.S. Navy bringing money to the table, by the U.S. Forest Service Forest Legacy Program bringing money to the table, and those lands are held by the state of Maine and by the Maine Appalachian Trail Land Trust. Again, an example of how our work with a park unit doesn't have to be exactly within the park boundaries. Perhaps the most famous example of this with the Trust for Public Land is Mount Vernon, George Washington's homestead. We have done a lot of work historically on the viewshed from the park, so that as you sit on that front porch and look out at the vista that George Washington admired and wrote about, you get essentially the same vista today across the Potomac River. And so the Piscataway Park has been the beneficiary of a lot of those acquisitions designed to protect Mount Vernon, and we've acquired a lot of lands to essentially buffer the scenic integrity and the cultural resource value of Mount Vernon. So the first case study we're going to walk you through is, again, on the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. And I'm going to give you a little bit of background on the Appalachian Trail, but not go into a ton of depth and drill down on the specific acquisition we just completed in New York last year. I believe there's going to be another webinar in the fall hosted by the Park Superintendent, Wendy Jansen, and by the Appalachian Trail Conservancy about their landscape conservation program. And that will fit in a sort of a bigger context for some of the land acquisition work that we're doing on the small scale. So stay tuned for that later on in the year. But just the basics for those of you who don't know the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. It's a 2,190-mile trail, Georgia to Maine, across 14 states. The park gets about 3 million visitors per year. It's America's first national scenic trail, designated by Congress in the National Trail System Act in 1968. And the Park Service lands basically connect existing land units, national forests, state parks, state forests, that sort of thing. And those Park Service lands average about 1,000 feet wide to provide a buffer for the hiking trail and to protect critical natural and cultural resources along the route. But at 1,000 feet wide, that leaves a lot of land that's vulnerable and critical resources that aren't protected, including the viewshed, significant wildlife habitat, side and connecting trails, and watersheds. The Appalachian Trail is also very important in a community conservation context. So many times the federal Appalachian Trail lands will be the largest piece of open space in a given community. And that's certainly true in Pawling, New York, the project that we're going to talk about in a second. The communities oftentimes are struggling with protecting their scenery, protecting wildlife habitat, their drinking water sources. Many towns are working on tourism strategies and recreation economy and how that can be a source of economic development and improved quality of life. And then, we all are working on how to adapt and deal with climate change as a new reality for our work. And we're going to show a slide in a second about how the Appalachian Trail is a really key climate resilient corridor for all of North America. And then finally, the Appalachian Trail is the most diverse unit of the national park system, mostly because of its length, going from Georgia to Maine. It has more occurrences of rare, threatened, endangered species than any other park in the system, and it's really just a function of how many different ecoregions it can go through. This slide is an animation. I hope it's coming across. And this is a slide I shamelessly stole from some of our partners at the Open Space Institute, who've been doing a lot of research to try and apply the latest climate science to the Appalachian Trail, Appalachian Mountain large landscape. But as you look at this animation, please note how the spine of the Appalachian Mountains along the eastern seaboard is really the critical link in for how wildlife, both mammals, birds, and amphibians, will move and adapt to a changing climate. And if you think about this, it kind of makes sense where the Appalachian Trail is located on the spine of the highest mountains in the east, and as the wildlife tries to adapt to a changing climate, things are tending to move up in elevation and north in latitude to adjust to a change in temperature and a change in climate. So the Appalachians can be a refuge and a movement corridor for wildlife. And then our partners at the Park Service and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy are leading a big tent strategy to try and engage land trusts, hiking clubs, watershed groups, et cetera, from Georgia to Maine. And they've identified some priority focus areas. And the specific project that we are working on that we're going to talk about next is in the Hudson Highlands focus area, just north of New York City. And so this gets into the details of how an acquisition with the Trust for Public Land works with the National Park Service. This is the Corbin Hill property in Pawling, New York, in Dutchess County. This is about an hour and 20 minutes north of Manhattan. It's on the Metro North commuter rail line, and the Metro North is significant because it has a direct line from Grand Central Station to the Appalachian Trail, where there's actually a dedicated train stop. And so a hiker who wants to get out of the city and go experience one of our national park units can take a train, not having a car, show up in Pawling and go for a hike on the Appalachian Trail. That blue line in this map is the Metro North commuter line, and the dot is the train station. And as you can see, the Appalachian Trail, the dark green, is the existing federal land, and it sort of does a dog leg around the subject property. There's an important vista that's in the top left screen at Cat Rocks, which is a cliff, and one of the most prominent view sheds for the Appalachian Trail in New York. And because of its proximity to such a densely populated region, this is an area that's quite vulnerable to subdivisions and sprawl. It's currently kind of a beautiful agricultural valley, but it's been highlighted for large-scale development in the recent past. This is the vista that we're talking about, and so this is the view from Cat Rocks, which is again a popular destination for day hikers and overnight hikers on the Appalachian Trail. And the property we ended up conserving is really in the foreground view and part of a large pastoral landscape that everyone loves to enjoy, especially people who are just getting out of New York City. So let me talk a little bit about the specifics of what's going on with this acquisition. It was 219 acres, and it was owned by a developer, and that developer had successfully permitted it for 50 houses. And so instead of looking out on that beautiful vista, you might have been looking down on a whole bunch of house lots and roofs, and instead of walking by kind of a beautiful farming landscape and through the woods, the danger was that you'd be hearing lawnmowers and smelling barbecue grills, which is not really the kind of hiking experience that the Appalachian Trail is trying to provide. Also importantly, there's two different endangered animal species that are potentially in conflict with the current footpath location here, and there was a desire to move the trail away from the sensitive habitat. There was no ability to do that based on the current land base. And so part of the solution to resolve this conflict with habitat considerations was to sort of expand the ownership and allow for a better, more permanent trail relocation to minimize that conflict with habitat values. We talked about the Viewshed. The Dover oak, just kind of a trivia thing, it's the largest blazed tree in the Appalachian Trail. It's a white oak. It's this massive tree. And the parking lot that hikers use is right next to this tree, and all the cars parking were encroaching on the root system. And so part of the concern for this grand, majestic, centuries-old tree was to relocate the hiker parking to a better location that wouldn't be impacting the root system of this tree. And again, there's no room to do that. So by purchasing this additional parcel, over the next few years, we anticipate that the Park Service will be able to relocate the trail and relocate the parking to much improved locations. The property hit the open market, and the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and some of their local volunteers identified it as a really significant threat if it was to be sold for development. And the park superintendent got in touch with the Appalachian Trail Conservancy and with the Trust for Public Land and said, we would be interested in acquiring this, but we really can't act that quickly. And with the property listed on the open market, someone needed to act very quickly. So we stepped in and we worked with the landowner to negotiate an acquisition contract and put down non-refundable deposits to give us time to go through the federal appropriations cycle. We also negotiated a fixed price acquisition, which turned out in the end to be a slight bargain sale. We had a firm value at $2.35 million. Turns out the final appraisal was a little over $2.4 million. So we saved the taxpayer about $63,000 by stepping in. And we held the property off the open market for over a year, waiting for the due diligence to be completed and for the funding to flow. So how does this, concrete example, what are some of the lessons learned here? Well, it's identifying a property early and engaging the Trust for Public Land as early as possible so we can work with that landowner and with the agency to try and put together the right strategy that's going to allow the landowner to have a sense that their sale is going to go through, and the agency to go through the process to seek funding and get through the many due diligence steps. In this case, it ended up as a really high priority for the agency on the LWCF list. It was the #1 priority in fiscal year 18. And that once we saw that list come out, we were able to take an even bigger risk of putting down more deposits, knowing that the funding was going to be there, and it was just a matter of waiting. And so, we have a sophistication of being able to sort of align with the federal process with a private seller to try and, buy the time necessary to get from here to there. But that requires risk. And in this case, we had tens of thousands of dollars out the door in non-refundable deposits in order to buy that time and keep that land off the open market. And we also absorbed well over $100,000 in staff costs and due diligence costs. And we were really lucky to have significant funding support from the local community, from the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, from the National Park Trust. And then, the final piece here is that it doesn't take any work away from the Park Service realty staff. They still have to check every box and go through every step. But in this case, the fellow who led the process is Don King, probably one of the most experienced land acquisition staff of any agency in the country. He's been with the Appalachian Trail for decades and a really great guy to work with. It was a pleasure. It felt like a partnership, and it led to a really great result, for the American people, for the Appalachian Trail, and importantly for the local community. And this was us on the celebration hike. Everyone gets a thumbs up, including folks in the photo from the Trust for Public Land, the Appalachian Trail Conservancy, the National Park Trust, and the National Park Service Realty team. And here I'm going to turn it over to Brittany to talk a little bit about the Chattahoochee NRA in Georgia.
Thanks, JT. So this is another case study, the Chattahoochee Natural Recreation Area. The Natural Recreation Area encompasses nearly 10,000 acres of land and has more than 65% of the public green space in the greater Atlanta area. Since its creation in 1978, the Chattahoochee River Natural Recreation Area has become a vital outdoor destination for more than 3 million people who visit each year. The recreation area is widely used by runners, hikers, cyclists, birders, anglers, kayakers, as you can see in this lovely photo. LWCF, which is Land and Water Conservation Fund, to the Chattahoochee River have yielded tremendous economic benefits to this highly populated area. A National Park Service report from 2013 reported that the park spends nearly $124 million in communities and local communities near the park. As the population in the greater Atlanta region continues to grow, protecting green space for new recreational opportunities, wildlife habitat protection, and drinking water protection is more critical than ever. Land acquisition has also had strong financial support from the private sector, which has provided approximately $8.4 million towards recent LWCF acquisitions at the Chattahoochee Recreation Area, and local governments have also protected parkland in addition to what the park unit has been able to do to really expand the area for park access. Next slide, please. So this acquisition, the acquisition that the Trust for Public Land has been working on, in addition to the natural beauty of the site and the activities mentioned, it also is going along with the planned improvement of pedestrian and bicycle trails around the Route 20 bridge, which would be a major step towards achieving the objective of improving public access to the river. It also permanently links conserved lands along the river to create a protected wildlife corridor and a safe haven for many different kinds of species, including eastern bluebirds, Canadian geese, blue herons, eastern box turtles, white-tailed deer, and a variety of fish species. The Freedman property, which you'll see on the map on the next slide, is located in the uppermost section of the Chattahoochee River, and it's the most pristine section of the park, and it's a cold water fishery. So permanent protection of this section was incredibly important to prevent fragmentation of the green space, in addition to all of sediment and chemical fertilizers and runoff that the Atlanta area generally gets. Next slide, please. Great. So this is a map of the Bowman Islands unit of the Chattahoochee area. It's the area where the Trust for Public Land has been working most diligently, and where I, in my federal affairs capacity, have done a lot of work recently. So if you take a look, you can see at the top red section, that is our Deep River Farm parcel. The middle parcel is Drowning Rock, and the bottom is James Creek. Those have also all been active at the same time for TPL. So a key to success for these three projects was the Trust for Public Land's ability to leverage the private philanthropic funds with the that we raised with the appropriations from the Land and Water Conservation Fund. We also had very strong and consistent support from the NPS region and the superintendent. And as JT mentioned, one of the great things about working with partner groups like ours is the ability to just make LWCF money go even farther. And we've definitely been able to do that in this particular project. Next slide, please. Right, so you can see that this is the same area as the previous map, but the middle section, which is the Drowning Rock parcel, that's the parcel that we were able to acquire in December of last year. And so we were able to use FY18 LWCF money for that. The top parcel, as you can see, we're anticipating LWCF FY20 for that. And the bottom parcel, which is the James Creek one, we're anticipating potentially some FY19 money for that one as well. So also, as JT mentioned, the ability to kind of to buy the land and hold it for the federal appropriation cycles, that's definitely something that we think is very important, because these particular units were threatened with residential development, which could really change the character of the river. And so a crucial part of our success at this particular location was our organization's engagement with the U.S. congressional offices to secure their support for our work. So this particular area of the river is actually at the confluence of two House districts, the 6th and the 7th district, as well as the two senators, of course. And so it's really important that our federal affairs team is able to submit the appropriations request for a robust land and water conservation fund and be able to demonstrate what that means on the ground. So as part of that, I arranged an in-district visit for the local members and staff who have offices in that general area. And some of them hadn't been to that river since they were, in middle school or high school, and some go all the time. And so it's really important to be able to demonstrate, we put in this ask in your DC office for your staff, but this is a park and a recreation site that you and your family and your constituents use all the time, particularly as the greater Atlanta area gets more and more developed, and you kind of lose some of those natural areas. And so again, you can see the map, those three spaces that we've been working on. So next slide, please. And so one big, this, as you can see here, this is economic data on the outdoor recreation industry. These stats and figures from my work with the federal affairs team is very critical in how we're able to talk about the importance of these sites. Obviously, people at NPS and conservationists and outdoor enthusiasts, like many on the phone, it's very apparent why green space and why rivers and why fishing and why birding is very critical for local communities. But some people need an extra push, and they really want to know, what is this going to do for my district and my state? And so working with other organizations and our partner groups, like the Outdoor Industry Association here, we're able to use all of our shared data and to in a combined way to demonstrate that this is important for your constituents, for their well-being, for their health, but also as an economic bonus for your area. And so for sometimes when you're talking to philanthropic members or members of Congress who may be unfamiliar with the outdoors, or maybe they're just not outdoors-minded people, this kind of data is very important and can build some really important bridges that can help push projects along. All right, next slide. So yeah, this is the contact information for myself and for JT. The Trust for Public Land has 28 offices nationwide. So no matter where you're located, we do work throughout the country. And so we're always looking for new projects and new ways to be helpful. So please feel free to reach out to either one of us with any information that you have. Next slide. All right, and so we have about 20 minutes for questions. I believe Cassandra with NSP is going, NPS is going to kick us off.
Great, thank you so much to both of you for the excellent presentation. Just a reminder, if you do have questions for the presenters, feel free to go ahead and plug them into the question box. At this time, we don't have any questions quite plugged in there, but I'll go ahead and get us started with one. Does the Trust for Public Land work with other land trusts, and if so, how?
Sure, I can answer that. We absolutely work with other land trusts. Our role is to really do to facilitate a transaction, and we want to always leave the property with a permanent conservation steward. And so sometimes that can be a federal agency like the National Park Service, but many times it can be a local land trust who will be the one to monitor that property in perpetuity. And oftentimes, too, the source of our projects will oftentimes be local land trusts as well. They may look at a particular landowner or a particular property and say, gosh, this is really expensive or really complicated, or it's a landowner with who's difficult to deal with in some way, and so they will call us in as a group that has national credibility and has expertise in handling federal funds, and also kind of a higher pain threshold for dealing with a complicated acquisition or a difficult landowner. And so a lot of our acquisitions originate with local partnerships.
Great. And we still don't have any questions quite in the box yet. Oh, here's one. When should a park reach out to the Trust for Public Land versus a local trust?
So I think the best answer for that is that if you have a land acquisition problem that is that's beyond the local land trust capability, or something that you really would like to see go into federal ownership, we are uniquely suited to help with those kinds of problems. And so many times a local land trust doesn't have a federal affairs office and expertise and all the hoops and hurdles involved in federal acquisitions the way we do. So I think, the answer is, feel free to contact us about anything and everything, and we can always say no if it's not a good fit, but we're always happy to look at opportunities, but we generally try and specialize in things that are bigger and beyond what a local organization can do, and really requires the resources and expertise of a national organization such as ourselves.
Great.
Another question
here.
Go
ahead.
Oh, I was just going to add quickly that the federal affairs team is definitely happy to help out. There's a lot of different funding opportunities beyond LWCF. I know JT mentioned quite a number of few in his section. So if it's something that you think there may be an option, or you're just curious about an option, feel free to reach out, and we're happy to have those conversations.
Great, thanks for that addition, Brittany. And another question here that's come through: does TPL get involved in farmland preservation?
Yes, we do. So it really depends upon the state and the circumstances as to how much of that work we do. But the answer is yes, and we work quite a bit with the Natural Resource Conservation Service on farmland protection, and there's really good case studies for how we can do that. And I've worked on a bunch of those properties in New Hampshire, and I know we have a really robust program for ranch conservation in Colorado. So it's not a universal for every market where we operate, but it's definitely something that we do.
Another question in the box here. Generally speaking, do you allow hunting, fishing, biking, that kind of thing on your various types of land?
So the answer to that is very specific to the outcomes that are achieved. So we do not intend to hold land in perpetuity ourselves. so we are always looking to transfer a newly protected property to a public agency or to a local land trust. And so we would look to those conservation holders' rules for how they operate. So if we're working with the U.S. Forest Service, their lands are open to hunting and fishing, those sorts of uses, and we would, advise the community that those rules would apply. Most national parks are not open to hunting, and so that would apply there. So it's very case specific. I would say a lot of our projects are really focused on providing public access, and that can include access for hunting and fishing. It can include, all kinds of trail systems. Our mission is really land for people, getting people connected with the land, and that can happen in a number of different ways. But we really look to the eventual conservation holder to set the long-term policies for, what types of compatible uses might be allowed.
Yeah, so it sounds like you basically adopt whatever the agency or the landholder that you're giving that land to or transferring it to. Another question that's come in is specific to TPL's role in urban parks. Can you talk a little bit about your role in urban areas?
Brittany, do you want to field that?
Sure. So the Trust for Public Land definitely works in urban parks. We have an entire urban parks program, in fact, and we are committed to our goal of having for each person in this country to have access to a park or a green space within a 10-minute walk. So that is very much a focus for the Trust for Public Land going forward. The Federal Affairs team is currently working on a carve-out of LWCF that will specifically go to our urban park works. There's a stateside program that's currently ongoing that we do a lot of projects with. But additionally, there is a new bill in the House and the Senate version will be introduced soon that will specifically designate money for the Outdoor Recreation Legacy Partnership Program, or ORLP, which is not one of the easier acronyms to get out, but that's where we are. And so, yeah, we definitely do a lot of urban parks and green space and a lot of different projects there in cities. We also do things with the EPA Brownfields programs and a lot of different, more urban-focused grants. So if there's interest or you have a park project that may be a good fit, we're happy to also have those conversations as well. And also what we consider urban and what is very, and also what this new bill that we've helped to draft considers urban is basically any suburb, any town with, I think it's 500,000 people. So urban doesn't have to be, New York City or Los Angeles. A lot of times, pretty much every state in the country has an area that's considered urban, and we might just consider it a township or a suburban area, but we certainly work in all of those places as well.
And somewhat of a follow-up question to that, how does TPL determine its priorities in general? Like project near a park or an urban or non-NPS or BLM? Like how does TPL decide which to focus on?
That is a great question, and I think we struggle with that every single day. We are generally looking for projects that have impact, and so as the organization that's all about people, we want to see that a project has a high impact on the places that people care about, and that might be a park in a densely populated urban neighborhood that doesn't have a lot of green space, or it could be a community forest for a very small rural town. But we're really interested in seeing how open space can help transform communities and makes people's lives better. So we really are looking for great stories. We're looking for projects that have high impact. We also tend to specialize on things that are bigger in terms of the dollars involved. As a national organization, we have a lot of capabilities, and so we tend to specialize in bigger projects, things that are many hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars, because a lot of times our costs to do an acquisition are fixed. You have to write a grant, you have to do a survey, you have to do an appraisal, and we'd rather put those efforts into something that's at scale. So we're looking for a really great impact on the ground and communities that are really going to be transformed by the open space outcome, and we're looking to sort of look at something that's through a financial screen and a risk management screen. And then the final piece is, we only work with willing sellers. And so if someone just doesn't want to sell, and no matter how important their land might be, we just can't do anything. But we have a lot of skill and a lot of people who are very experienced negotiators. And so oftentimes we've been successful at helping, find those win-win outcomes that really help communities achieve their open space goals, or agencies to achieve their open space goals. And so, so we're quite proud of the properties that we do engage on.
And then last question here, and then we'll go ahead and wrap up. How does the NPS compare with BLM, Forest Service, Fish and Wildlife as a partner in general? Like, are we one of your prominent partners that you work with, or are you working with other agencies more often?
Well, just really quickly, and then I'll pass it on to JT. So I do a lot of the liaison work with the National Park Service. That's one of my roles within the Federal Affairs team. And so I've had a very successful relationship with NPS. I think that we have a good working relationship, and I think that a lot of the projects just have so much impact, as we mentioned earlier, that they make us natural partners. We also do a lot of work with the other agencies. In my current portfolio, we're doing a lot with the Forest Service as well. And I think sometimes it's just an ebb and a flow about which projects are available and which ones we're working on at any given moment. But I'll also pass it over to JT.
Well, since this is a Park Service presentation, I'll just say the Park Service is the best agency we work with. In all seriousness, we love working with your agency, in part because the stories and the impact is so profound. Lands come into the national park system because they're of national significance. And so as an organization that wants to do the kind of open space for America that's really profound, when we're working with a national park unit, it's generally just a great story. It's by definition of something that's of national consequence. And then the other thing I'd just say is that because we do projects year in, year out and have this long-term partnership, we tend to know the rules and the systems and a lot of the agency staff, and it's a really wonderful partnership. We have similar partnerships with the U.S. Forest Service or with BLM, but I think some of the Park Service acquisitions are these just really tremendous stories. Some of the best press we've gotten in the last couple of years was when we added an in-holding at Yosemite. That kind of national level attention is hard to do if you're working in a lot of other places. And so I think it's really one of the best examples of how we've been really successful over the years as partners between the Trust for Public Land and the National Park Service.
Yeah, and I'll just add quickly that my absolute favorite project that I've ever worked on at Trust for Public Land is a national park unit, and I won't say which one, but it's one of the best places that I think I've been. So it's a pleasure to work with you all.
Well, I think it's safe to say likewise. Certainly thank you both for the presentation today, and we appreciate the work that you're doing. It's important, that's for sure. To all our participants, thank you so much for tuning in. This webinar will be posted shortly after we conclude today. And stay tuned for our next webinar, which is scheduled for May 1st. We'll be listening to the High Divide Collaborative, which is in Montana and Idaho at 3 Eastern, 12 Pacific. You can register for that webinar and all of our others on our internal toolkit for Connected Conservation, as well as on the Network for Landscape Conservation website. We hope you all enjoyed it. Thanks again, Brittany and JT. We appreciate the work you're doing. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thanks.